So while we are waiting for the others to join our meeting, maybe we can ask someone to volunteer to lead the opening prayer. Okay, I'm saying thank you, Genesis, for raising your hand. Maybe we can still wait for your other classmates because we have merged the two sections. Maybe we can wait for 2 more minutes, okay, and we'll start at 7:12. Genesis, will you now please lead the opening prayer?
Classmates, are you ready to
Ready, sir?
pray?
Yes, we are.
In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Okay, thank you, Genesis, for leading the opening prayer. And as what we have mentioned in our class group chat, we have combined the two sessions for this meeting so that we can also maximize our makeup classes from the past, institutional events, and we'll be able to at least meet our target, which is to administer our midterm examination next week. Okay, so for at the moment we have already completed so far 5 different chapters. Now we're just left with 2 more lessons for chapter 5. So with that, that is the purpose why we have met now for this afternoon. So with this, we'll proceed to the 2 remaining sub-lessons for chapter 5. And I believe that from the other section in this ND1A, there are some who have classes, but I believe it was mentioned by Michaela in our class group chat that they don't have classes. It was suspended. So with this, I hope they were able to join our meeting. And since some of your classmates may not be able to join, specifically that for this week, I hope it is you are also amenable to meet online, because we know that we're just it's just after that we have suspended our classes for, or we have shifted our mode of classes to asynchronous or online classes, particularly last week. And of course, there are still precautions that we still observe this week. So with that, I'll be opting to meet you online. Likewise, because it is very important as well to cover our target. So if I'll meet you face to face, most likely we cannot reach until chapter 8, right? So with this, what we're going to do is we're going to meet tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Okay, but that would only be online. Now, if it happens that some of your classmates will have classes, I'll try to download a third party software so that we could be able to record our meeting, and those who might be interrupted, who might be experiencing intermittent connection now in your respective homes, we may they may be able to review whatever we have discussed during our lecture. Is it okay with you? Because we really have to do it so that when we meet face to face, we'll proceed to our laboratory activities. Okay? What we'll do next week before we administer our midterm examination, we'll have the series of short quizzes from the chapters and the lessons that we have discussed in the past 2 weeks, including this week. Okay? So far, do we have any clarifications? So if none, we'll proceed to our yes, Jenny, you're raising your hand.
Sir, for the short quizzes, when
Mhm.
po ito ma-hold?
That would be for 1B. It will start next week on Monday. And successive na po iyon until makover po natin lahat ng chapters that we have discussed online. Okay lang po? So, please focus on if there are, more likely in the past, um, in the other chapter, we're not able to deal with figures, right? However, in the integumentary system, already there are some leveling figures, right? So you need to familiarize them, and specifically in our next meeting, which is tomorrow, we'll be discussing skeletal system. So marami po din dong labeling. Okay? So you please start, no? Familiarizing, pero if not enough of familiarizing, you memorize. Okay? So most likely our practical exam would also deal on moving exam on identifying different types of bones. Okay? Do we still have clarifications? Or do you have concerns that you would like to address? None? So we'll proceed to the continuation of our lecture last meeting. Have we discussed already the different physiology of integumentary system? Or this is the slide where we ended? This one underneath. Okay, thank you for the confirmation. So before that, maybe we can have a short review of what we have. This is maybe we just focus on the key terms, no? Key terms and concepts that we have discussed regarding on the integumentary system, right? And we knew that, or we're able to learn that the integumentary system is otherwise known as simply as our skin, right? And it's considered to be the largest external organ of the body. And can we still recall the different functions in particular? Remember that there are five major functions that we have cited last meeting, right? And specifically in the last part of our lessons, we're able to provide no further discussions about these major functions. Can someone enumerate the five major functions? Now, anything that you can recall, what's the major functions of the skin?
Bukog.
Right? It adds covering. So if it covers, Hello. It's a question, class.
It adds
Anyone who would like?
protection.
Yes, okay. So it adds protection. Basically, because it is a covering, then most likely our skin is exposed to the external environment. Now, you're very familiar with the cell, right? So with this, that only shows that the external environment that also represents the skin's structure as it reduces the negative and the harmful effects of the ultraviolet light. Though it's also a good thing that there are mechanisms of our body that allows it to prevent such as dehydration, right? And the water loss in our body. Another is, of course, it is where our senses are embedded. That's why one of the major functions of the skin is through sensation. Now, in the skin, there are sensory receptors that can actually detect heat, cold, touch. That's why we're able to feel this, no, sensations. Then third, we have temperature regulations, which is one of the core vital signs that we have discussed during our beginning lessons. If we can still recall that our body is able to regulate its temperature because there is an insulation provided by our skin, specifically that there are different glands, right? And one of these glands is, of course, our sweat glands, right? And speaking about the ultraviolet light that it protects, it is also true that our skin is able to produce these molecules that are converted in the form of vitamin D, which is an important regulator of calcium homeostasis. Remember that nowadays, of course, there is in particular the time of the day that we were able to expose ourselves to the vitamin D production that is beneficial, right? That's around 6 to 7. Now, for excretion, we mentioned last time that there are small amounts of waste products that are actually excreted to our skin and our glands. And our sweat, no, our sweat glands produces this, and that's actually one form of excretion. At the same time, the oils, right? And the other term for the oils that are produced in our body are through the sebaceous glands. Okay? So please remember them because most likely the exam will actually focus on questions identifying which may not, or either it may concern about the functions that describes the skin, or maybe you're asked to choose which does not. Okay? Now in our skin, we have actually identified some different layers of our skin, and primarily there are how many layers, class?
Sorry.
Two.
Two. Sure.
Yes, primarily there are two, and these are
Epidermis and dermis.
okay. And all of this, diba, we knew that in the superficial between the two, what is the superficial layer?
Epidermis.
Epidermis.
Epidermis. Then going deeper, that would be the dermis. And the dermis is embedded in what layer? What's the next layer for dermis? So that would be your where all these subcutaneous where all the adipose, not the fats, are actually embedded. That's actually in your subcutaneous
But tissue.
tissues. Okay. Later, when we discuss about the different types of burns or classifications of burns, that will actually highlight the role of the subcutaneous tissues. Now, in terms of the layers that I have asked earlier, specifically in the epidermal layers, diba, you mentioned that there are two primary layers. Now, in the epidermal layers, where the keratinization happens, can we enumerate the six different layers, epidermal layers? This is from deep to superficial. What's the deepest? Could be is the layer where the cells are capable of dividing, no, through
Stra-
mitosis. That is
Stratong
strata.
basali. Charis.
Okay. Since we are asking for the layer that is in the deep layers, so that we will start with the stratum basali. Next to stratum basali,
Stratum spinosum. Asa na sir?
stratum spinosum.
Tungayan siya.
Okay. And next to that is your,
Stratum granulosum.
okay. Then in the fourth layer, that would be your stratum lucidum.
Lucidum.
And on the superficial, that would be your stratum
Corneum.
corneum, where all the dead cells are actually embedded. Now remember that the direction of the cell movement, since we started with the stratum basale, then most likely this is where the new cells are actually formed. And it actually moves upward, not towards the superficial, until such that we'll be able to reach the superficial, wherein this will actually be converted into dead cells. Okay? Now, on the dermis, we mentioned about the one characteristics of dermis, particularly on how incisions. Now, remember that when we cut incisions, it should be parallel or across. Which do you think would be between the two cases? Which is more likely when we go into incisions, which is has the higher rate of increasing the time or the faster rate of healing? Is it making an incision across or making an incision parallel? Diba we follow cleavage line? Do we go across or do we go parallel?
Across, sir.
Ah, sigurado? What do
Parallel,
you think?
sir.
We're asking about the faster healing, yung mas mabilis. Yes, our
Parallel.
incision,
Parallel, sir.
our incisions or sutures, yung tahi, must be able to follow with the cleavage lines. Okay? So that it will not leave scars, right? Because pag across, remember that they will go against with the cleavage line and that will take time for healing. Okay? Now about the hair. Di ba we're familiar about the hair? Now we'll ask with the different layers of the hairs. What do you call with the layer that is unpigmented? Basically, this is the kind of hair that is developed in the fifth or sixth month of the fetal development. Primarily, this is the kind of hair that is developed by our fetus. So that is, they may cover the fetus, but however, as it developed into 9 months, basically they are actually gone. And this is what we call as,
Lanugo, sir.
yes, these are what we call as lanugo. Now, if they are lost, no, since they will be replaced of what? Because when it is already near time of birth, this lanugo will be replaced with the pigmented hairs. Kasi yung unpigmented naman po yung ating lanugo, right? Once they are already, if the mother is already near to the time of birth, then most likely this lanugo will be replaced with pigmented hairs, which we call as
Terminal.
Vellus.
vellus
Vellus.
terminal hairs.
Terminal hair. Asa na sir? Terminal.
Yes, these are what we call as terminal hairs. Meanwhile, the vellus hairs that you mentioned are those that will replace the lanugo with the rest of the bodies. Okay, because remember that vellus are also unpigmented. What they will replace is the other or the rest of the body that will not be replaced by the terminal hairs. Okay, so now there are several structures of the hair. Now, looking into the figure that I have shown you last time, The hair is actually divided into shaft, right? We knew that the shaft, it is the one that protrudes, no, the surface, the one that is visible on our naked eye, right? And on its deepest layer, we have the root, right? Wherein it is located just below the surface. And remember, in the root, it is expanded in order to form the bulb. Now, if we have the bulb, what do you call the layer that is closest to the central axis of the hair? Meaning, diba, if this is our bulb, diba, there are different layers that we mentioned. In fact, there are three concentric. Diba, we go into the central, particularly into the dividing it into transverse. We have the upper and the lower, right? We cut in between. So it forms a concentric layers. Now, what do you call the layer that is central axis of the hair?
Medulla, sir. Oh,
Yes, that is what we call as medulla. Okay. Now the other, which is the cortex, is just the outer layer, right? But the one that protects these two concentric layers is what we call as cuticle. Now in terms of hair color, what gives color to our hair? Same is true with our skin. Yes, that is
Melanin.
actually melanin. Okay. Now what produces melanin? What are the cells that produces melanin? So again, you just have to add, di ba, pag formation, you just have to add the suffix CYTE, right? So we form melanocytes, no? Through the melanocytes, we form melanin. And in hair color, this melanin are actually passed into keratinocytes, right, of the skin. So that the melanocytes within the hair will be able to form the bulb that produces this melanin and pass it to the keratinocytes in the hair, which we called as the cortex and the medulla. Now, in our skin, what structure actually consists of smooth muscles that are associated with our hair follicle? Diba there is a structure that supports, no, our hair. And what do you call this? Smooth muscle cells.
Erector.
Yes, okay. These are the bonds, right, of muscles. So these are what we call as erector pili. Now, there are several glands also involved in the production of the different hormones in our skin. Now, one of this is our sebaceous glands. Now, our sebaceous glands produces what hormone or what product? Sebaceous means these are oils. And what is the other term for oil?
Sebum.
Yes, this is what we call as sebum. Now, we also have another type of glands which is the sweat gland, right? What is the other term or the medical term for sweat? It's what we call as, okay, sudoriferous. Okay, okay. Now, what are the two types of sweat glands? Which we have mentioned it also in the previous discussion on tissues. We have,
Eccrine and
yes,
Green
apocrine.
and green.
okay, eccrine and apocrine. Okay, how will you distinguish the two? What's the difference between sa kanilang dalawa? Again, they are simple called tubular, pero where, in what aspect do they differ? Mari pero pinagkaiba? Laki magpares, daw lain yun. Okay, where do they differ? From the name itself, we even include last time about merocrine, right? Eccrine, merocrine, and apocrine. But this time, eccrine is sometimes otherwise called as merocrine. Saan po sila pinagkaiba? Remember where they are actually located. Remember that the eccrine glands, saan po sila nakikita?
Surface of the skin, sweat pores.
Yes. Okay, they are actually located onto or open directly onto the surface of the skin, which was mentioned earlier. That is the sweat pores. Now, how about apocrine? Now, this would be in the areas that are found in the
Axillary and genitalia.
yes. Okay, and even around the anus. Okay, so that would be the difference between the. Now, how about the other glands? We have mentioned two, right? One is the ceruminous glands. Okay. Now, which is responsible? What is the other name for cerumen?
Earwax.
Yes, earwax. Okay. And you know naman na how to clean your ear canals. Okay. Or even our stethoscope, you know already how to place them. You just follow the curve, no, of the ear canal. Then for mammary glands, where do where can we classify mammary glands? Apocrine or eccrine?
Apocrine.
Yes, apocrine. Because if it is all over the surface of the skin, that would be eccrine, right? So please remember the difference between the two. How do you cut again your nails? What shape do you follow in cutting your nails?
Where?
Where?
Okay, ideally it should be square, okay, so that it would prevent the growth of ingrown, okay? So again, if you are asked about the thin plate consisting of layers of dead stratum corneum, cells that contain a very hard type of keratin, that is our nails. Okay? So remember that our nails are already dead stratum corneum. Okay? However, there are still attachment to the skin, right? That's why the nail is consist of both the nail root and the distal nail body. Okay? Yung malapit no, to the midline is our nail root. Then the distant to us is our nail body. Then remember that they're also corresponding or different parts of the nails. Okay, so then please don't forget the grooves, then the nail root extensions. So if you look at the small part of the nail matrix, which is otherwise known as the whitish part in our nails, what do you call that one?
Lunula. Lunula.
Okay, that is what we call as lunula. Okay. Then how about the edges of your nail body? There are grooves, right? And it provides a structure which is what we call as
Free edge.
yes, that is the free edges. Okay. Pero down to your free edges, it actually supports to your hyponychium. Okay. And again, our nails also has a layer which we call as cuticle. Okay, same with what we mentioned earlier. Now, we'll proceed to the continuation of our discussion on the physiology of the integumentary system. So, primarily, that will give the main functions of the integumentary system. But as what we mentioned in the beginning of our lessons, we just already mentioned the five. Then we'll just further, on how we could provide a synthesis of the physiology of the integumentary system. So these are our learning outcomes. If you notice, no, parang similar lang po sila kanina, right? How are we going to relate the protective functions of the skin, the hair, the glands, and the nails? So these are the different structures and, of course, different components of our skin and how they are related to the no, protective function of the skin. Then we also have the skin acting as a sense organ. Remember that we mentioned about sensation, right? And we also have to discuss the importance of the skin in terms of temperature regulation and discuss as well the involvement of the skin in terms of producing vitamin D and in excretion. So this would be our topic outline. This is just a review of the first part of the lesson. Now, in terms of integumentary, there are actually five that we mentioned, right? I just missed the other four. But to start with the protection, again, the skin protects the underlying structures from mechanical damage. Now, all of this, no, that we see from just me admit your other classmates who are trying to join our meeting. But the skin as the external, no, or external or the superficial layer that separates no, the internal body to the external environment that actually provides us no, a protection from mechanical damage. In fact, the layers, no, the primary layers that you mentioned earlier, which are the dermis and the epidermis, they play roles in terms of acting as line of defense. No? But they do have different ways of performing it. No? When we have the dermis is very particular in terms of its composition on being irregular, dense connected tissue of the reticular layer. I hope you can still recall with the reticular layers, okay? Because with the reticular layers, it is actually providing the structural strength. So meaning it can stand against abrasions that we mentioned last time. And in fact, it can also prevent tearing of the skin. So that's why that is the reason why your skin does not easily break. And the reason for that is because there is a connective tissue providing a structural strength, which is the dermis. Now we also have the stratified epithelium. Okay, we just mentioned discussed about epithelium last time, and we'll speak about the stratified. They appear to have several layers, right? At the same time, even in terms of their cell shapes, they vary. That's why they called as stratified. Now, this layer, which is the stratified epithelium, they protects us against abrasion. Because yung abrasion is against rubbing, right? That's why we can retain at the same time we can bear with the rubbing effect is because of the stratified epithelium. But remember when we do measure the temperature, di ba, we simply adjust first, specifically when we do vital signs, right? So particularly on blood pressure. So when we do blood pressure, what do we do with the diaphragm of the stethoscope? We warm them, right? By how do we warm the diaphragm? By placing the diaphragm between our palms, right?
Pal.
So that mm-mm. So that we'll be able to warm the diaphragm and do not create um, trauma, no. At the same time, it could be able to adjust to the patient's or the client's skin. As the outer layers of the stratum corneum, which will actually slough off, remember that the stratum corneum is our superficial layer. Now, they will be replaced by the cells from the stratum basale. So please don't forget that the stratum basale, which we mentioned earlier, undergoes mitosis, right? So meaning they are the one that produces new cells. Now, for those cells, particularly blood cells, that are embedded in the outer layers of the stratum corneum, they would be replaced by the cells coming from the stratum basale. And one of the concrete examples that we could cite is the calluses, okay? Calliope. So calluses are actually developed in areas subject to heavy friction or pressure. So when you try to look at your feet, right, some could have calluses. And that's natural because that's a product of friction and pressure, no? But there are some na mas makapal talaga, right? Because that is too much, no? Too much rubbing and too much friction that happens in their feet, okay? But they can be removed naman po because they are dead cells, okay? Second is the skin prevents microorganisms and other foreign substances, okay? So the skin are actually providing us protection, no? Protection against microorganisms or even foreign substances. And one of the fighters, not the one that protects us, is actually because of our skin glands, which we have mentioned earlier that these are the sweat glands and the sebaceous glands. And the secretions of these glands actually provides us an environment that would be unsuitable for some organisms, right? Because remember, if the microorganisms could be able to thrive, and they will be able to harbor on our skin. Now, the skin also contains components of the immune system that acts against microorganisms. And remember, the one that remembers the microorganisms that have already been in our system or in our body are what we call as the T cells. Then for those that produces the antibodies are the B cells. Okay? Just remember B cells, BBB, that's building. We're going to further discuss about these different types of cells when we reach the different glands on the endocrine system. Aside from that, the melanin that we mentioned earlier also provides protection. Remember that the melanin, which we are most likely, it's a blessing for us, no? Filipinos, that we have higher melanin than other people around the globe because it absorbs ultraviolet and be able to protect our underlying structures from further damaging effects. And aside from that, our hairs as well. No, these structures that we can find on our skin also provides protection in several ways. One is the hair on the head acts as a heat insulator and it protects against ultraviolet light as well and even abrasions. Likewise, our eyebrows, no? Our eyebrows are not for aesthetic only, right? Though some are very particular, no? With their eyebrows, but naturally, the function of the eyebrows are actually to keep sweat out of our eyes and even our eyelashes, no? Their purpose is actually to protect the eyes from foreign objects. And our hair in the nose, no, our cilia, and our ears prevents dust and other materials from entering. Okay? And also our axillary and pubic hair, they are present because they are to protect against abrasions. And we also have our nails. Our nails protect the ends of our fingers, toes from damage, and can be used as our line of defense. And six, the intact skin plays an important role in reducing water loss because its lipids act as a barrier to the diffusion of water. Now, there are several functions of the skin. In fact, an example of this is the nicotine patches that are applied to help reduce withdrawal symptoms in people attempting to quit smoking. Now, that's also a challenge, no? A challenge for those who are smokers who are trying to withdraw or even attempt to quit smoking. And one of the protection that our body could actually be that they can actually use as a barrier is that this liquid lipid soluble substances can actually pass through the epidermis. In fact, these lipid soluble medications can be administered by applying them to the skin, and by applying that would easily no easily and slowly diffuses through the skin into our blood. So parang though we could not say that it's faster rate in terms of the absorption, but it could allow the smoker who wanted to withdraw to at least be able to satisfy the outcome of following this medication, which is the lipid soluble medication. Now, for the temperature regulation, obviously, our body temperature is affected by the blood flow through the skin. And the blood flow can be described by the vasodilation and vasoconstriction that we have discussed during our second meeting. Now, if we try to look at the blood flow when it constricts and when it's dilate, so when you try to look at this picture, it's actually the blood that blood transfers heat from deeper tissues to the surface of the skin. This is the surface of our skin in line of the epidermis, and this is the deeper tissues that lines the blood transfers. Remember that the heat, no, that the heat from the blood as it transferred to the tissues, deeper tissues to the surface of the skin. Remember that the heat is actually lost, no? The heat is actually lost across the epidermis increases. And any alteration in the blood vessel diameter, therefore, blood flow allows for regulation of heat loss at the skin. What happens during heat loss is that the blood vessels dilation results in increased blood flow toward the surface of the skin. Di ba pag sinabi natin dilate, it increases the surface area. So, when there is an increase of the blood vessels in terms of its diameter, then there is an increased perfusion. Okay? Now, if there is increased perfusion or blood flow beneath the epidermis, then it will increase also the heat loss. Okay? Now, the heat loss could actually be indicated through these red arrows until such that this blood vessels dilated. Then this blood vessels dilates, or what we call as vasodilation, then it will transfer the heat, the heat that has been lost to the surface of the epidermis. Okay, that has increases, and it is where the heat exchange happens onto our skin. How about constriction? Now, for constriction, if you take a look at the figure, we have here the blood vessel constriction results in a decreased blood flow. Instead of having a multiple blood vessels where blood could actually flow, in constriction, as it constrict the blood vessels, then most likely it would actually reduce or decrease the blood flow beneath the epidermis. And of course, the result of this would be the decrease in heat loss because there is a heat. There is a less heat exchange in the skin. The constriction of the blood vessels reduces heat across the epidermis. Now, this vasoconstriction will result to the heat loss across the epidermis decreases. So, if you take a look at this now, since there is only less perfusion of the blood flow into these blood vessels, most likely there would be also a decrease in the heat loss that will be transferred or would be across the epidermis. Remember that when the blood vessels, particularly the arterioles, right? Arterioles, is it towards the heart or away from the heart? The arteries. In the arteries, the blood, actually, yung pinaka-endpoint niya is the arterioles. Diba mag-isun sila sa capillaries? So, yes, away, okay? Away from the heart. They are the blood vessels in the dermis which actually dilate. Then when they dilate, more warm blood flows from the deeper structures to the skin. So we'll just skip this one because this is the what the figure is illustrated earlier. And just take note that whenever there is temperature regulation, that is also a one form of the body in order to maintain homeostasis. Now, for homeostasis, that is where the excess heat must be lost. And that's why the body accomplishes this by producing sweat, which we have, no? How many times that we have already discussed that one in the previous lessons. We just skip this one on the flow. Now let's proceed to the vitamin D production. Again, for the vitamin production, this is very particular on the calcium and the phosphate homeostasis. Now, the primary role of the skin is to stimulate the uptake of the calcium and the phosphate at the small intestine. Remember that the absorption of this vitamins are actually through the small intestine. And the adequate levels of these minerals are necessary for the normal bone metabolism. And of course, the calcium is required for the normal nerve and the muscle function. There is also the synthesis of vitamin D, which begins in our skin when it is exposed to ultraviolet light. Now, now people can also produce vitamin D. They may just require this by the process if enough ultraviolet light is available. However, today, now if you notice, people live indoors and they wear clothing and their exposure to ultraviolet light may not be adequate for the manufacture of the sufficient vitamin D. Okay? This is especially likely for people living in cold climates because they remain indoors or even covered by warm clothing when outdoors. Okay, that's why the geographical location could also matter in terms of the vitamin D production in one's body. Now, the natural sources of vitamin D are some foods which you might be familiar with: the liver, the egg yolks, and other dairy products such as the butter, cheese, and milk. And in a particular diet, now we can actually supplement the vitamin D in fortified with milk and other vitamin pills. Looking at this figure, this is the production of vitamin D, wherein the body produces vitamin D when the skin is exposed to ultraviolet light. Okay. Now, looking at this figure, the UV rays from the sun are actually led to the precursor in skin which is converted to cholecalciferol. Now, this cholecalciferol will be modified in our liver, and finally, the modification in kidney produces calcitrol, which is an active vitamin D. Now, one of this precursor molecule, which has been mentioned earlier, is the 7-dehydrocholesterol, which is stored naturally in our skin. And when they are exposed to light, this precursor molecule will be converted into cholecalciferol. Okay, from 7-dehydrocholesterol, it will be converted into cholecalciferol. Then, this this cholecalciferol will now be released into our blood. Now, once the cholecalciferol is now in our blood, it will be transferred first to the liver, where it will be modified. And the modified cholecalciferol will re-enters the blood and is transferred to the kidneys. Because remember that the kidneys will be the one to filter, the filter what has been entered into our blood. And the kidneys will also be responsible when the substance is again modified to form active vitamin D. And this is what we call as calcitriol. Now, it stimulates the uptake of calcium and phosphate at the small intestine. That's calcitriol. Lastly, we have excretion. Now, from the word itself, excrete, the removal of waste product in our body. Now, what are these products that supposed or are expected to be removed from our body, including, of course, water are actually regulated our body, the salts, and the sweat contains a small amount of waste product, including urea, uric acid, and ammonia. These terms may be unfamiliar on your end, the urea, uric acid, and ammonia, but when you discuss about nitrogen cycle sa biochemistry, doon yung pumapag-usapan sila ammonia. Okay, ammonia, urea, and uric acid. Okay? Now, how about if there are large amounts of sweat that will be lost, right? Because if you are engaged in a strenuous activities or exhaustive activities, we would expect that as a form of regulating heat in our body, the body itself produces large amount of sweat, no, which is actually to cool down, no, to cool down our temperature. How about the quantity of waste product that will be eliminated in the sweat, which may be insignificant because the urinary system also excretes most of the body's waste products. Okay? So, if you notice, no, parang nag-overlap yung kanilang function, but that is well regulated when there is large amount of sweat that will be lost. Most likely, our urinary system will also be responsible to excrete, no, dispose them, so that it would not be another burden to the sweat glands to produce more sweat. Now we're down to the last, which is on systems pathology. Can we still recall what pathology is?
Study of
We have this.
diseases po.
Okay,
Yes.
study of diseases. Okay, now what diseases are actually specific to the skin, right? But we will not delve further into the different types, okay? But if we would have time, we will try to briefly discuss some of them because when you try to look at the reference material, there are some skin problems, no, or skin diseases that were cited, right? So maybe next time if we would have time, because there are only around 15 lang naman. Okay, these are the common, no, the common skin diseases that we may encounter, no, that are commonly not uh, common encountered, no, by any healthcare organizations. Now, or even one of the various, no, instances that would actually lead to pathology, systems pathology, particularly in integumentary system, is the burns, right? Now, if there are burns, this actually refers to the injury to a tissue caused by heat, cold, friction, chemicals, electricity, or radiation. So remember that burns are not only caused by heat, okay? They may also be caused by cold and even friction. And remember that all of these chemicals, electricity produces heat, right? So this is the injury that is caused to one's tissue. Okay? And they are classified according to two major criteria. But later, before we end our discussion, there are actually three, which is a combination of both. First is we have the extent of the surface area. Okay? And second is the depth of the burn. Now there are, in terms of the types or the classifications, it may vary between the young and the adults. So let's start with this one. This one's supposed to come first. Okay. Now, on the basis of the depth, there are two classifications as well. That is the partial thickness and the full thickness burns. Now, we also have the partial thickness. Under partial thickness, there are first degree burns and second degree burns. Now, let's start with the burns in adults. Okay. Now, as we mentioned earlier, that is in terms of the depth and the surface area. Now, the surface area burn can be conveniently estimated by the rule of nines, which is illustrated in this figure. Okay, and it varies from A, which is an adult, and B, which is an infant. It divides the body into areas that are approximately 9% or even multiples of 9% of the body's surface area, which is otherwise known as the BSA. Now, looking at this figure, it is mentioned that the in an adult, it is divisible or multiples of 9. And it actually covers major area of the body of even the total body surface. Now, if you try to look at this, the rules of nines in burns for adult, the head is equivalent to 9%, same is with the upper limb, and we only have 1% for the genitalia, and our trunk here our trunk and our lower limb has 18% respectively. Okay. Now, how about for infants? What would be the rule of nines? So the head is 15%, and the list is still in the genitalia, and of course, the one that shares the greatest is the lower limb, which is equivalent to 17%, followed by the trunk, which is 16, and the head, which is 15 years old. And this is the case when the infants and children, wherein the head represents the larger proportion of surface area. Even that's true, no? Upon delivery, the fetal parts that has the largest, no, surface area is actually the head. How about the young? Okay, the young, which we have mentioned earlier, has a surface area relationships which are different from the adult. Okay, for example, the head and the neck of the young, right, which is assuming that's 21%, no, basal surface area for infant, whereas an adult they are actually 9%. Okay, and the victims younger than 15, there are a specific table that or even development that has been provided for consultations. Now, what about the partial thickness point? Again, in terms of the basis of the depth, it would be the partial thickness and full thickness point. Pero pag tinanong po kayo what are the criteria, yun na po. Okay, yung 5. At if ever you can still find one. Now, for the partial thickness bonds, there are first degree burns and second degree burns. Let's start to discuss first the first degree burns, now under partial thickness burns. It involves only the epidermis and may result in redness, pain, and slight edema. Can we still recall the five manifestations, class? First is,
Redness.
okay, first is redness, followed by, yes, yes, Joe, you're sharing something? What next after redness?
Sir, pag naisip sir, hit.
Huh? Diba there are five? Diba there's third function yung five? Then pain. Then
Heat, sir.
swelling. Yes. No? Nag-iisa po kasi yung redness and heat. Okay, redness and heat. Then swelling, which is
Swelling.
otherwise known as edema. Then we have
Pain.
pain and disturbed
Disturb.
function. Okay? Now, with this, if we encountered the first three, the redness, the pain, and the slight edema, that would be first degree burns. Okay? Second type of burn under partial thickness burn, we have the damage the epidermis and dermis. So kanina epidermis time, this time it also encapsulated the dermis. Now there is minimal dermal damage causes redness, pain, edema, and blisters. So meaning one other effect that has been added is the formation of blisters. Now, if you take a look at this figure, di ba, we have discussed the structure of the skin. Divided into layers, epidermis, dermis, and subcutaneous. Yung hindi po talaga dito sinasama is yung hypodermis, right? So, in figures, you cannot find hypodermis. Now, if looking into this figure, okay, the partial thickness could be first degree and the second degree burn. Kasi yung pangatlo, which is the third degree burn, is otherwise known as the full thickness. Now, if you take a look at this, where's our full thickness? Ito, dito na lang. The full thickness or the third degree burn, they destroy the epidermis, the dermis, and even sometimes the deeper tissues here. So, this figure will just simply sum up, no, or even illustrate to us if in what layer is being affected by this classification of degree burns. So again, there are two major classification, partial thickness and full thickness. But in partial thickness, there are two, firstborn were only affected in the epidermis, right? And there are three. Di ba? Yung ating uh, redness, swelling, and heat. So we also have the second degree, which reaches up to the dermis, okay? And the full thickness, which has destroyed the epidermis, the dermis, and sometimes it has already reached the subcutaneous tissue or the deeper tissues. Okay? Were you able to follow, class? Okay. Now, if we take a look at the factors and even the systems that are affected when there are burns, again, the symptoms for burns are the following. We have tissue damage of the skin, possibly deeper tissue. We also have edema, shock, and microbial infection. Since there are several no, there are several systems in our body, maybe we can focus on some that we have already discussed in the previous meeting. Okay, so say for example, for muscular, they have hypermetabolic state, may lead to loss in muscle mass. Okay, now for full thickness, which we mentioned earlier, it is otherwise known as the third degree burns. It has already affected the epidermis, the dermis, and even the tissues just below the skin may involve, often surrounded by first and second degree burns. Now the burn is usually painless. Now if you try to think about it, now why is it in the third degree burn it is considered to be painless? Which is supposed to be, di ba? It's already exposing the subcutaneous tissues, yet it is considered to be painless. It's because,
Cancer and Medj kay
Nagubalan
mag-blood
sensory receptors.
may pagkaroon na niya
yes, okay. That's why in our body, di ba, we less experience pain because they lack nerves, right? Or sensory receptors. And when these are actually lost or been burned, most likely we could feel painless. Okay? And it appear white, tan, brown, black, or deep cherry red. Depende na lang on the aftercare that has been provided for burns. Okay? Kasi iba talaga, it leaves scars, right? If not, of course, maintain. Now, how about the fourth degree burns? This time, it is the very no, or extremely severe burns that affect tissues deeper than the subcutaneous tissues. So, some of the affected areas could be fascia, tendons, muscle, and the bone. Okay. Now, in burns, we have the term which we call as the debridement. Okay, debridement. This is the removal of the dead tissue from the burn, right? And sometimes, now we cannot deny, pag even our wounds, di ba, pag if once already healed, our tendencies is actually to remove these dead tissues, right? And removing these tissues, it also reduces the prevent infections. Okay, what we can do is by cleaning the wound and removing the tissue in which infections could actually develop. And the common procedures that are performed today are skin grafts, wherein it is performed within a week of the injury, and it will also help close the wound and prevent the entry of microorganism. Okay, but there are two means of how we close, no, or heal our wounds, right? What are the two types? There is the closed and the other which is open, right? And we have mentioned that there is faster rate of healing when it is closed. Now, we mentioned earlier about the basis, right? The basis of the depth, which is either be partial thickness or full thickness burns. And we also have the partial thickness classifications, specifically to first and second degree burn. Now, we could also add another criteria wherein we include or we had the combination of both the depth, this one, and the basal surface area, which is the percentage. Okay, Now, combining them both will result to classification of seriousness of burn. First, we have the major burn. From the word itself, it is considered to be a third-degree burn over 10% or more of the BSA. So again, you just follow this one. BSA. Ito. Basal surface area. Now, how about if it is second-degree burn, which has over 25% or more of the BSA? Okay? And it is second or third degree burn of the hands, feet, face, genitals, and anal region. The facial burns are often associated with the damage to the respiratory tract, and they often deals with the scar tissue formation that limits the movement. Now, in addition to the major burn, we have moderate and minor. Okay, for our moderate burn, it can be third degree burn over 2 to 10% of the basal surface area. Ilan po kanina dun sa major? That is equivalent to over 10%. Now, for second degree burn, their consideration is 15 to 25%. However, in the major, that is already 25%. Now, for minor burn, there are some that can be classified as third degree burn, but there is less than 2%. Okay? And the second degree burn could also be over less than 15% of the BSA. Okay? Basal surface area. Now, as a concluding part of our discussion for this afternoon, we'll be discussing about the effects of aging on this integumentary skin, which I believe is very common, no? That as we all, of course, we tend to look at our skin, which is saggy, no? And more likely wrinkled. Now, that's why we're just going to list down the changes in the integumentary system that undergoes with age. So remember that our skin becomes drier with age, okay? It's because the reason for this, the sebaceous gland activity also decreases. Now, when our activities also decreases in terms of the activities intended for the sweat gland, and the blood supply to the dermis will actually result to the reduced ability to regulate body temperature. Okay, so meaning in any change in terms of the activity of our sweat glands and our blood supply, then more likely it will their um, affect them in terms of regulating their day with the day temperature. Then how about the elderly? We knew that for this topic on the effects of aging, elderly individuals who may not have taken uh, proper precautions may actually uh, would actually experience heat exhaustion. I hope that we can still recall the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke, okay? Which can even lead to death, okay? Particularly sa heat stroke, okay? Now, when our bodies ages, kung tayo ay tumatanda, remember that our skin is more easily damaged because our epidermis has already thinning, and the amount of collagen in the dermis decreases. Okay, that's why we could see skin infections are more likely and skin repairs occurs more slowly. But we need to remember that the decrease in terms of the number of elastic fibers in the dermis will also affect the loss of the adipose tissues. And the subcutaneous tissue will actually cause the skin to sag and wrinkle. Now, there are number of functioning melanocytes, okay? Generally, diseases. It actually decreases. However, in some localized areas, especially on the hands and the face, melanocytes increase in terms of the number, and likewise by producing age spots. But remember that age spots are totally different with freckles. Okay, because they are caused by increase in melanin production, not an increase in melanocyte number. Okay, and we also have the white or the gray hairs, which we commonly looked in our elderly individuals. They grow because of a decrease in lack or chain of melanin production. Now we need to remember that the effect when we expose our skin to sun, it is observed in areas of the body that receive sun exposure, okay? Only for the hands and the feet. Now we need to consider that the effects of the chronic sun exposure on the skin are also having a different, also have a different from the effects of normal aging. Now, in our skin, when it is exposed to sunlight, normal elastic fibers are replaced by an interwoven mat of thick, okay? Thick elastic-like material by collagen fibers decreases, and the ability of the keratinocytes to divide is being impaired. Now, if you take to look at the effects of the exposure to sunlight, no, sunlight on the skin, we have the first one, which is a 91-year-old Japanese monk who has spent most of his life in there. Then we have 62 years, 62-year-old Native American woman who has spent most of her life outdoors. Okay, so if you try to look at the picture, there is a significant difference. Okay, because of their exposure to sunlight. Now that's it. No? And we're already done with chapter 5. Okay? So next meeting we'll be proceeding to skeletal system. So so far, do you have any question or clarification, class? And may I ask or confirm for BSND 1A, do you have class tomorrow? Like even same pa rin, 7. If you don't have classes, maybe we can start at 5:30.
May the sir not sure if magklase po kami with accounting po. We have 5:30 to
Ah,
8:30 po.
okay. Until what time, Jo?
8:30 po sa accounting.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we'll record our meeting, or if not, we'll meet on Wednesday. Because that's our time. How about on BSND 1B? Because maybe we'll not be meeting tomorrow, so that we'll just spend our class on Wednesday, uh, so that the 1A will be able to join.
Okay lang
Yes, it's still online. It's still online. Our meeting for this week will purely online. Okay? Sige. So, tomorrow, since they have classes up to 8:30, if I will not be able to download a recorder, okay, a third-party software that can record our meeting, then we will meet on Wednesday. Okay? But if I could be able to find one, then we will proceed with our meeting and we'll just give or provide the link to the recorded session to B's and D1A. Okay? So that um, maybe it's on your end, Raymond, because your other classes were able to react, that they were able to follow as well. Okay? Okay. So again, I'll just finalize these presentations. I'll be providing you copies of my slides. Okay? Because this is quite too thick. Okay? So I just choose those significant terms so that what will only be retained are the keywords. Okay? But of course, I'll provide a brief meaning of those. Okay? Yes, Janeline, you're raising your hand.
Sir, so for BSND 1B, sa Wednesday pa po yung class or bukas po online?
Bukas. If tomorrow I would be able to find or download the third party software
Mm.
or even the application that can record the meeting, then we'll proceed with our session tomorrow. Okay, I'll inform you maybe in the afternoon if I was able to do it. Now, if not, then we'll just proceed with our discussion or we'll just be meeting on Wednesday. Okay, is it now clear?
Hello, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. How about the others? Do you have any clarification? Because if
Mm.
okay, so if there is none, maybe we can take a documentation of our meeting this afternoon, and we'll before we dismiss, we will have our closing prayer. Okay, so may I just end sharing my presentation, and may I ask everyone to please open our camera so we could. Uh, yes, Raymond, whom are you directing to provide instructions in the chat box? I could not do that one. Okay, maybe you can just ask your other classmates, no? Because everything that I've said, if I'm going to write that one, I'm going to write an essay. Okay? Sige. So maybe you can just ask further clarifications from your classmates. Okay? Yeah. Again, can we please open our camera so we could have or take our documentation for our meeting for this afternoon. Okay? So 1, 2, 3. Again, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now can we ask a volunteer to lead the closing prayer? Really now, anyone who would like to lead the closing prayer?
So let's pray for our closing prayer. Our most gracious, kind Heavenly Father, dear Lord God, thank you for the day that you've given to us, the blessings and the lessons that we've learned. I hope, dear God, you bless us and give us knowledge, dear Lord, and forgive us, dear God, from all our sin. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
So with this, we call it as a day, everyone. Thank you for joining our meeting, and we'll see everyone no, face to face next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, sir.
Bye,
Thank you
sir.
po.
Bye,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Okay.
Bye, sir.
Bye, sir.